Anyway, guys, thank you. So you know you can give me notes or any questions to all three people. Remember, we're speaking at the time period, so we're trying to reflect what President Roosevelt said, President Wilson, and Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan would have said about this disaster unfolding. All right, and then they'll certainly take questions and everything after. All right. Did you hear that, guys? Yes? Feel free with the questions. We're speaking of the time period. And we'll go. Who would like
I'll do that. Senators everywhere. I like it. And we have a camera over here, correct? All right. Should I take this off? No, I'm in class. So, speaking with my mask on. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I would like to thank everybody for coming out today. For first, I'd like to welcome and say hello to my distinguished colleagues, former President Roosevelt and President Wilson. Today we must make a decision that will affect our country and our people. This war in Europe is a great one with thousands dying each day. Most are soldiers, while others are innocent women and children. As of now, we are not involved in this war, and that is the way it should stay. Mr. Roosevelt would like nothing more than to jump right into this slaughter with guns ablaze. Please understand that I am not afraid of war, especially when it is for a just cause. Just like Mr. Roosevelt, I served in the Spanish-American War with the 3rd Nebraska Regiment. But don't let Mr. Roosevelt's pro-war speech fool you. He has lobbied for peace in the past. Mr. Roosevelt and I feel that there are times we need to stay neutral and help other nations achieve peace. In 1905, while on the world tour, I helped advance a peaceful resolution to the Russo-Japanese War by meeting with leaders and delivering a proposal for arbitration in a speech before the IPU. My ideas were adapted by President Roosevelt, who later won the Nobel Peace Prize for his successful mediation in this war. Mr. Roosevelt lobbied for peace then, and he should lobby for peace now. The ground that I stand upon is for true neutrality. Although President Wilson will also be speaking about neutrality, it's obvious he does not know the true meaning of this word. I am very grateful for the President naming me his Secretary of State, and I normally stand beside with him on his decisions, but this judgment has clouded it. By trading with nations who are at war, we are allying ourselves with those nations. And because of Britain's blockade in the North Sea, it is impossible for us to trade with both sides evenly. This is not true neutrality. In order for us to remain a neutral nation, we must ban all trade with warring nations. By doing this, we will achieve a few things: no allies, but more importantly, no enemies. And we will not have to worry about losing more lives in a war zone, the seas of the Atlantic. And to assure the safety of the American public further, I think it is necessary that we ban American citizens from traveling upon belligerent nations' ships. The American public was warned by the German government of the dangers of traveling on ships flying the flags of the Allied nations. These countries are at war, and they'll do what's necessary to protect themselves. We can ask for an apology or money damages from Germany, but what are they really at fault for? And what are the chances of us getting anything returned from Germany? Since I was appointed Secretary of State, I've negotiated arbitration treaties with 30 nations. And each of these has provided a cooling off period as a way to avoid war. So we have proof the use of an arbitrator works in settling disputes. Mr. Roosevelt knows this well. He's used the same system in settling the Russo-Japanese War while he was in office. And we must try to do the same thing here. We have many problems to deal with here in our own country. There's no need for us to put American lives on the line for a war that is not ours to fight. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I urge you to do what is right and most of all honest. We must remain a truly neutral nation. Thank you. And I will give over the podium to one of my colleagues.
President. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
You're welcome. Good deal.
Didn't realize that was in the way.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, senators. I really like to thank you for attending this inquiry. I know I've been out of office for quite some time now, and my colleague, President Wilson, will come speak to you shortly. We definitely have some differences in our views of what's happening. So, I'm standing next to the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief, Woodrow Wilson, and his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, who you've just heard from. On May 1st, 1915, the Lusitania, a British passenger ship, set sail from the port of New York to Great Britain. It was an uneventful voyage as the ship neared Ireland. Okay? Without warning, and I repeat myself, without any warning, a luxury liner registered to the Cunard Line on its 202nd voyage with 1,959 civilians aboard. And included in this number was 159 American neutral citizens, was torpedoed by a U-20, a German submarine, and sank to the ocean floor in 18 minutes, killing 128 American citizens and hundreds of other nationalities, men, women, and children. My esteemed colleagues, before you, I stand before you and testify that we, our nation, have been neutral. President Wilson says we must remain neutral in heart and mind, while his Secretary of State states that across the seas our brothers' hands are stained with our brothers' blood. He says that they need a flag that speaks to the sentiment of the human heart, a flag that looks forward to better things than war. Force begets force. Love begets love, Mr. Bryan says. Well, I'll tell you, as of this moment, 128 Americans sleep in a cold, watery grave. It is from a heart that shows love for one's brother. And I agree that their hands are stained and show blood. I agree, Mr. Secretary, that this shouldn't be. But this comes from a cold-hearted killer. The aggressors are brothers. They are cold-blooded people who kill innocents, declaring they want to be warned before a ship is sailing. Well, I warn you that if we let this monster raise its head and continue the killing, we will be the ones guilty of not stopping this war, this insanity. The French socialist, Mr. Juarez, spoke to those who would listen about the horrors of war. But the Kaiser, the pompous tyrant of Germany, refused to listen and brought the mightiest army of Europe to its feet against his own blood. Those that gave him summers on the shore with their family, those who begged him to step up and look to reason, not for war with his own cousin. The tyrant declared war, and now has brought war to the United States of America. Senators, this isn't the time to be neutral, in heart or mind. It was not the time in 1776 when Mr. Dickerson suggested to our founding fathers to reason with a king that refused all reason. It was not the time in 1861 when we entered the scourge of slavery. It was not the time in 1898 when we went to free a beleaguered people. This is not the time either. President Wilson, in his infinite wisdom, asked for an apology for the cold-blooded murder of 128 American citizens. It's too late for an apology, which would not hold any sincerity from the monster of Germany and his allies. The president asked for monetary damages. I ask you, senators, and I ask you, President Wilson, how much is an American life worth? Do you know, Mr. President? I know that you're a former president of prestigious New Jersey University. Do they teach that in your university? Do they teach cowardice will bring peace? Do they teach that the shark will not attack its prey when hungry because it promises not to do so? I do not believe so. I believe that you, Mr. President, are delusional, and you wish to delude the citizens of this great nation of thinking that that's true. Senators, this is not the first sinking of ships by the Germans. Why not stop this tragedy after the sinking of the Falava, where other Americans died? This, I trust, will not be the last. America is a great nation. We were born with stubbornness. We will always stand for freedom, for the betterment for its people, and for the betterment of people around the world. We cannot be too proud to fight, as the President declares. We cannot be blinded by this spineless jellyfish. We must stand for what is right, for what is good. We must do this now. I do not believe the worst peace is better than the best war, Mr. Secretary. A moral war, a war which we must end, and end now. And that can only be done when we join the righteous of the world and destroy this monster. If we do not, we will be like many other nations of the world. And we're told to regard things, to stand back, let things run its course. We will be dominated. We cannot be dominated. We must stand our ground here and now. No, Mr. President, we're not too proud to fight. We're not too proud to listen to this nonsense of your supposed neutrality while making millions of dollars and selling arms and asking for an apology. This is the only answer for America. In this century of America, we must use that big stick now to be able to walk softly in peace later. Mr. Secretary, no one is neutral when the innocent lives are lost. No one is neutral when we're told not to sail the seas, when we're told we must not travel freely. Why not just impress our sailors, stop our trade, and suffocate us? We should not beg for money and guarantees. It's time for this president to be the commander-in-chief at this moment, now. Ladies and gentlemen, senators, I've been out of office for a long time, as I said, and I do have a perfect horror of words not backed up by deeds. So it is with that I thank you, senators, for your time, your patience, for listening to this old man, this man that stepped into the 20th century because of a bullet, the man that has always believed in American exceptionalism. Thank you for your time. President?
Yes, there, you jellyfish.
Spineless. What?
Thank you, Mr. Roosevelt. President Roosevelt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Bryan, for serving almost loyally to my administration. Thank you to the American Press Corps for coming today, reporting this event. Senators, thank you for rushing here for this urgent meeting. I look forward to hearing from you and ultimately having your support in the decision and proposal that I'm about to make. I'm going to make it clear. Now is not the time for war. Remember that. Now is not the time for war. Wars are easy to start, difficult to finish. The United States must not enter into this war in Europe despite the rhetoric we just heard from the former president. And now is not the time to become fully neutral despite the position taken from my Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan. Okay? People who really love America will act and speak in the true spirit of neutrality, which is this spirit of fairness and friendliness to all that are concerned. I know that Mr. Bryan also has proposed neutrality, but he no longer wants us to travel the seas, and he no longer wants us to trade with our allies. Now is not the time for a lockdown of the American economy. I'll address these positions further later in my speech, but first I want to address the incident that just happened with the sinking of the Lusitania. The government of the United States is not unmindful of the extraordinary conditions created by this war or the radical method of attack used by the Germans with the sinking of the Lusitania. The methods of naval warfare used by the Germans, which the nations of the world cannot have had in view when the existing rules of international laws were formulated. The technology of warfare has changed substantially since the wars that former President Roosevelt has talked about in 1898, in the Spanish-American War, in 1861, in the Civil War. We have total new types of technology, deadly weapons of mass destruction that will kill millions. This is a different type of warfare. This is not going to war in 1861 or 1898. The rights of neutrals in time of war are based upon principle. It is the duty and obligation of belligerents to find a way to adapt the new circumstances to them. And these are new circumstances presented by modern warfare. Sinking passenger ships, make no mistake, is totally illegal and unacceptable to the United States of America. That we all can agree. Freedom of liberty are in every American's DNA. We've had that since the Declaration of Independence, in which we adopted in 1776. We as Americans do not like to be told that we can't do something. And the Germans are not going to tell us that we can't travel the seas and trade with our allies. That's unacceptable to all Americans. We will not accept Germany's demands that we can't travel the seas freely. That is not an option. That's where Secretary and I differ significantly. The whole world has looked with interest and increasing satisfaction at the demonstration of that possibility by German naval commanders. It is manifestly possible, therefore, to lift the whole practice of submarine warfare above the criticism which it has aroused and removed the chief causes of the offense. So, I will give you my plan now, not rhetoric. In the view of the admission of illegality made by the imperial government of Germany, I, President Woodrow Wilson, believe Germany must do the following. 1. The United States government demands reparation for the American lives lost, so far as reparation can be made for a needless destruction of human life by its illegal act. Germany must also pledge that it will not sink any future ships of neutral ships without warning. 2. The German government must apologize for its belligerent actions in sinking the Lusitania. 3. The German government must declare that it will follow international law and will not repeat these actions in the future. These are the proposals that are best for America. It's easy for my opponent, former President Roosevelt, who I defeated in the 1912 election, remember that, okay, to call for war. War is not the answer. He asked, how much is a life worth? You can't put a price tag on that. But I have to consider future lives I would have to send into the theater of Europe into this war in which millions have already perished. So I must ask the President, is your son's life worth this war in Europe? The cost is way too high to send millions of Americans over to Europe to die in a war that appears right now to have no end. European nations are spending money that they possibly can never pay back. Are we going to sink our economy by going into a war that we can't pay back? Are we going to lock down our economy and true neutrality, as William Jennings Bryan has proposed? Stop trade, international trade and travel? So total neutrality that he proposes is also not the answer. Americans have the right to sail freely on international waters. We also have the right of free trade. We now live in a global economy. So I must close with the United States must be neutral in fact as well as in name during these days that are to try men's souls. Thank you, Senators. This is the best proposal now for the United States.
Senators, now the floor will take any questions that you may have for President Wilson, Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan, and myself, Theodore Roosevelt. You gotta get that done.
Pass it down.
Yep.
My question is for Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan.
Yes.
If another tragic incident like the sinking of Lusitania happens again, are you still willing to sit back and not completely hurt our trade, or lose even more innocent American lives?
Yeah, I mean, the hope here is to avoid war at all costs. So if we are no longer traveling the seas, right, if Americans stay off these ships that are in the war zone in the Atlantic, we won't have to worry about losing any more lives in the Atlantic, getting involved in this war.
This is also for Jennings. How will you make up for economic losses from a lack of trade with Britain and Germany, especially Britain?
Good question. So, the question there, senators at home, is how will America make up the money lost if we are no longer trading with our allies at this current time? Well, truth be said, that our economy will be on a pause while this is happening. Okay, countries, as we know in Europe, all throughout Europe are at war. Right, countrysides being destroyed, buildings being blasted to the ground. Right, when these countries have to put themselves back together when this war is finally over. Right? And we're the last ones standing because we stayed neutral. Who are they going to turn to for materials, for men, right, to come over and to rebuild these countries and rebuild their economy? By rebuilding their economy, we'll rebuild our economy, putting Americans to work by having factories build all the supplies that are necessary for these countries to get back and running again. And we'll be getting calls from everyone since we did not pick a side in this war. So our economy will grow tenfold at the conclusion of this war by remaining neutral now.
Ask them at home if they have any questions.
I'm looking, I don't see any hands raised.
Senators, no other questions?
Any of you have any questions?
Secretary Bryan, I voted 16 years ago to go to war with Spain under similar circumstances. Explain to me why we should now stay neutral.
Well, if you remember the war with Spain compared to this war, right? The war with Spain was over in a few months, correct? We were fighting an empire that was crippling, okay? And even then, I question the judgment of that war because of the imperialism that Americans have been practicing, right? I fear that in this war, right, we've already seen millions die, okay? We've seen Americans' lives lost. I don't want to see any more lost, right, in a war that's, you know, a million times worse than the war that we fought against the Spanish. So To answer your question, this is not a war anything like the Spanish-American War.
Okay, I have a question from Trevor Rosamelia.
Yeah, my question's for President Wilson.
Who's Trevor? Where can I see him?
He's right here.
Hi, Trevor. Senator Trevor.
So my question is, so you're saying that we should take reprimands from Germany saying money for lost lives, but wouldn't that piss off Germany even more and make them want to go to war with us?
That's a great question. Thank you for your question. The German government is going to apologize for this. They are going to pay for this. I feel that they have learned that their action was hostile to the United States. Remember, we have a lot of German citizens currently living in our country. I'm sure they equally do not want to upset Germans here in America with their actions. They will admit their mistake, they will pay for it, and we can move on from this situation as they pledge not to do this again without warning.
All right, thank you for answering.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
My question is for Wilson. So what is your...
Wilson.
I'm sorry.
President
Wilson. So what is your plan if Germany refuses to apologize, or if they don't follow up with their agreement that you're planning on having them agree to?
Your first name?
Brooke?
Brooke, thank you for your question. Another great question. If they refuse to apologize and they further these actions with more sinking of our ships, I still hope to avoid this war. But even with the apology, even with the payment of reparations, I am going to start a preparedness movement for war, so if and when they do not hold up to these actions and they are not apologetic to this, in time we will be ready for war when that time comes.
President Roosevelt, how do you plan to increase our influence of the American military across our borders, especially after the Spanish-American War and after people are currently defending the borders of America?
Thank you, Senator. That's a good question. I have to answer that like this. This president has not prepared this nation because he wants to be neutral in heart and mind. We must be prepared. You're absolutely right, Senator. The money must be spent now in a preparedness movement to build a modern army, to build a modern navy. We did that before the Spanish-American War. Remember that. We had a very modern navy. This president has decided we don't need it. Okay? So we will need to spend that. We will need to put that money out. We will need to modernize. And we will be able to send troops overseas. To answer the president on a question that he posed to me about my son, all my sons, if called or if war comes, will be part of the military. We serve our nation at all times. I will be proud of them. And if the president would like me, I will also serve the nation in that way.
Anybody else at home?
Go ahead.
This is for former President Roosevelt. How can you justify going to war in Europe when the start of it was due to tensions that we were not involved with?
That's a good question, Senator. I thank you. Because we were not at the start of this. We did not cause this war. You're absolutely right. But sometimes we must rise above that. Although we're not the direct cause of it, we have lost Americans. We have been told that we cannot travel the seas freely, that we cannot trade freely. That impacts us as Americans, as senators, as citizens. We cannot have that. We must remain free. If Germany will not allow that, and her allies will not allow that, we must stand for that. The other item that's with this is the nations of Europe. We have to stand for humanitarian needs. We have to stand for those that need our help. Is that not what our nation is built upon? Is that not the beginnings of our nation? We stood against the mightiest armies in the world in 1776, and we succeeded. We will again. Even though, again, your question is good that we did not begin it. I do understand that. Would I prefer that this never happened? Sure. But it has happened, and we must be part of it. Thank you.
My question is also for former President Roosevelt. If the United States did get involved and was able to win the war, what do you think the most significant thing that we gained from it would be?
Freedom. Freedom. Freedom to travel the seas. Freedom to trade with whom we want. Freedom to go where we want. Well, also, as Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan said, after the war, there is going to be a peace settlement, something after a war. There always is. Do you want to be part of it, or do you want to be on the sidelines? Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan says we should be part of rebuilding Europe, that our businesses will be. I agree with you, Secretary of State. I agree absolutely. Do you want to be part of the peace process now? Do you want to help set the terms, or do you want the world around you to set the terms with us sitting at the sidelines? That's my answer. Any questions at home? Oh,
I got one, two there. Where? There's two on yours.
okay. Kunal, go ahead.
Two-part question. President Roosevelt?
Go ahead.
Okay, so in the event that we do go to war, will you support a draft of Americans?
Of course I will. But as we have shown in the past, as we have shown even as recently as 1898, Americans came forward to stand for what they believed in their nation. And they will stand again with or without that draft.
Okay, so you do support a draft, clearly. In that case, right, you talked about freedom, right? You talked about fighting for freedom. Would you support the drafting of people of color in this nation, even when they don't have equal rights?
Senator, you know me as your president in the past. Have I always stood for the betterment of people? Did I come out for the coal strike, for those new immigrants in this country, to get them some freedom, to get them some decent wages, decent working hours? I have always stood, for these ideas. I've stood on the side of the Lord when I ran in 1912, although I lost to this jellyfish over here, Mr. Wilson, but I will stand again for those ideals.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Senator Isham.
I have a question for the Secretary of State.
Okay? Yes.
So how do you expect us, America, to stay neutral if we ignore the blockade on Germany by Britain and continue to trade with Britain? Because doesn't that make us already the first ally?
That's exactly my point. So we need to make sure that we eliminate trade with both sides. We can't trade at all during this time of war. Because if we do, no matter what side we choose, whether we break in the blockade, right, or whether we are trading with Germany themselves, which we did in the beginning of this, we are allying ourselves with one of those two. We are not being neutral. So we need to put a pause on right now on American trade with these nations that are at war to make sure that we're neutral. Anybody else? Some clap here.
Ms. Rosenthal's class, anybody? Any other questions before?
President Wilson, your anti-war sentiment is a slap to the face to those families that lost sons in the sinking of the Lusitania. Those families are listening today, so what do you tell them?
Your name, please?
Waleed.
What is that?
Waleed.
Waleed, very good question. As Mr. Roosevelt had said before, what price do you put on a life? Okay? You can't put a price on a life. We are going to make them pay for the loss of those lives. But Senator, let me remind you, this was a British ship that was sunk. They were attacking Britain. Yes, Americans were on that ship, and we will protect all Americans' lives. But I have to consider the future fate of more American lives, okay? 128 are too many. As I said in my speech, they are losing millions in Europe. I have to consider millions of American lives balanced against 128. They are going to pay for those 128 lives. As I said, as much as you can pay for a life, okay? But I also have to balance that with future American lives. And if and when it comes a time for war, I must make sure the United States is prepared for that war, and I will. But right now, we are not prepared for that. Thank you for your question.
Anyone at home have another question?
Senators, any further questions?
For President Wilson. So before you said that if we sink another ship, or if Germany sinks another ship, is remaining neutral still worth those lives?
Senator Reagan, could you repeat that one more time?
So before you stated that even if Germany doesn't settle with your proposal, and that even if they do sink another ship, you still want to remain neutral in the war, is it worth that risk?
At this time, I do believe it's worth the risk. I don't think, any international incident, even if it involves American lives, you automatically just switch to the war mode that President Roosevelt has suggested. We're in an international economy now where these type of things are going to happen. It's inevitable, okay? We can't just have a knee-jerk reaction to we're going to go to war every time an American life is sacrificed. But it will be protected, and they will have to answer for it. So at this time, I'm fairly confident that the Germans will adhere to our demands.
Can't tell anybody on. Yeah, anybody look, Senators?
I should have went over there, I forgot.
Any further comments? Any further questions from this august body of senators? Well, then, as President Roosevelt, I thank you for listening. I thank you for being part of this inquiry. I hope you've come away with the ideas that are needed for America to continue on its climb to greatness, because that's who we are, to continue where we should be moving forward. We cannot always listen to those that want to shrink from the world, those that want to step back and let the world run us. We must look forward. We must look ahead. And those would be my policies and where I think we should be, and that is my family's policies. As I said to the President, my children will be there first, because this is what's important to us. I will certainly let Secretary of State and the President have their final words.
Once again, you've heard three compelling arguments here. They all are very good arguments. But the practical matter here is that we must continue our trade. It's not time for a quarantine of the Atlantic economy. And it's also not a time, remember, this was a British ship that was attacked. Americans happened to be on the ship. If American ships start being attacked, then we can consider another path. Pulling away now and sinking our economy, as my Secretary of State, soon to be former Secretary of State, is not a policy which the Americans can pursue at this time. Thank you for your consideration and time.
And as I had said before, right, the country will need to be on a pause for the moment while this is happening, okay? But the most important thing here is that we're saving American lives, right? Again, we're not putting dollars on the lives that are lost in the seas, right? There's no number that can pay for those lost lives. Well, the same thing here. There's no number that we need to reach during this time by trading with these nations that are at war that we can't make back later. If we can save lives now and make our money a year, 2 years from now, right, that's something that I'm willing to sacrifice at this point in time for prosperity later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.